A gilded cage. Beaumont Hall shimmered, a testament to wealth, with literal gold leaf outlining the ballroom's vast cornices. Even the dim light, muted by heavy drapes, couldn't conceal the gleam of gilded table legs. Yet, to Elara, it was merely a gilded confinement, a beautiful trap. At a lofty breakfast room window, she feigned interest in the meticulously arranged gardens. Roses, shades of vibrant scarlet and soft apricot, exuded an intoxicating perfume, almost a taste on the tongue, heavy and saccharine, mirroring the life she now endured. Beaumont was predictably tardy. A lavish spread, egg benedict, smoked salmon, a pastry pyramid, sat largely untouched. Elara pecked at a croissant, its buttery layers scattering onto her lap. Her appetite had waned in recent months. Heavy, impatient footsteps echoed from the hall. Beaumont stormed in, his features a study in dark displeasure. He was clad in an impeccably tailored riding coat, a crop clutched in his gloved hand. "This insipid swill is supposed to be coffee," he roared, the crop slamming against the table. Silverware rattled. A young serving girl, barely past childhood, hurried forward, her face drained of color. "I brewed it fresh this morning, my lord. Perhaps more sugar." Beaumont seized the pot, flinging it across the room. Porcelain shattered against the wall, sending shards and scalding coffee raining down. The girl gasped, recoiling as a dark stain spread across her apron. "Incompetent fool," he thundered. "Get out. Clean this mess. A single drop remaining and you'll regret it." The girl fled, a sob escaping her lips. Elara winced, her gaze glued to her plate. Any show of compassion would only draw Beaumont's ire, a lesson learned painfully early. He turned to her, eyes like chips of flint. "And you, why this starvation act? I refuse to have a consumptive wife." Elara offered a forced smile. "I am eating, my lord. My appetite is simply delicate." He scoffed. "Delicate? You ate like a field hand when I first laid eyes on you." A reference to the charity ball where he'd rescued her from penury. Rescued. The word left a bitter taste. He devoured a plate of eggs, chewing boisterously, mouth agape. Elara diverted her gaze, focusing on a small bird flitting amidst the rose bushes. She coveted its freedom. After his meal, Beaumont declared a day-long ride. Elara offered a demure farewell, relieved at the prospect of respite. Once gone, she roamed the house, directionless. Devoid of purpose, she was kept isolated, a mere ornament on display at his whim. Visits home were forbidden, letters intercepted. Her world had withered to the confines of this opulent prison. She drifted to the library, a sprawling sanctuary of leather-bound books that Beaumont never opened. He deemed them a frivolous waste, preferring hunting and wagers. Elara, however, found a haven within their pages. She traced her fingers along the spines, inhaling the scent of aged paper and leather. She yearned to lose herself in narrative, to flee from the stifling reality. The servants, following Beaumont's eruption, were busy in the breakfast room, faces tight. Elara knew she was the object of their whispers, their pity. She tried to disregard it, but their sentiment stung. Turning to leave the library, she noticed something discarded near the waste bin. A crumpled newspaper, yesterday's edition, likely tossed by a servant. Curiosity ignited, she retrieved and smoothed it. Headlines screamed of political discord and social upheaval, a world far removed from her gilded bubble. Her eyes darted across the pages, seeking anything to alleviate the monotony. Then she saw it, a modest advertisement tucked within the classifieds. Mail-order brides wanted. Women of character sought for marriage and partnership in the developing American West. Opportunity for land and a new beginning. Right to. The words swam before her eyes, her heart hammering against her ribs. A fresh start. Escape. The notion, audacious and perilous, sprouted in her mind. She meticulously folded the paper and concealed it in her pocket. A tiny ember of hope in the enveloping darkness, a fragile seed that, with care, could blossom into liberation. Later that evening, after Beaumont, smelling of horseflesh and spirits, had retreated to his study. Elara stole downstairs. Silence blanketed the house, the servants long since abed. She retrieved the newspaper from its hiding place. With a pencil stub found in a drawer, she copied the address from the advertisement onto a small scrap of parchment. Her hands trembled as she wrote, her pulse thundering in her ears. Discovery would bring dire repercussions. Yet, the thought of remaining in this gilded cage, slowly suffocating, was the greater terror. She extinguished the candle, plunging the room into obscurity. The address, etched on the parchment, glowed faintly in her mind, a beacon in the night. She had no clear plan, but one thing was certain. She had to escape. She had to reclaim her existence, to breathe untainted air. The mail-order bride advertisement was a desperate wager, yet it was her only prospect. Clutching the parchment tightly, she stole back to her room. The gilded cage might be beautiful, but it remained a cage, and Elara Ainsworth was resolved to shatter its bars. Whispers of hope. Elara's quill whispered across the heavy parchment, the sound amplified in the tomb-like stillness of her sitting room. Each careful character was a silent supplication, a hope given form in ink. Her words spoke of a longing for unadorned existence, a spirit chafing against gilded bars. She skirted around Beaumont's malevolence, veiling the truth in gauzy phrases, unfortunate circumstances, a divergence of spirits, a yearning for autonomy. Unveiling too much risked branding her as damaged. She needed to project optimism. A tenth perusal left her brow creased with doubt. Did the prose reek of desperation? Reveal too much or too little? The tightrope demanded perfect balance, conveying a desire for partnership without appearing a damsel in need of rescue. At long last, with a sigh that stirred the dust motes dancing in the afternoon light, she folded the letter, sealing it with a generic wax crest plucked from a neglected drawer, a rampant lion of obscure provenance. She addressed it to Mr. Caleb Miller, Harmony Creek, Montana Territory. The designation echoed with unfamiliar promise, beckoning from a world beyond Ainsworth Manor. A tentative knock fractured the silence. Enter, she breathed, her voice barely audible. Mary, a junior housemaid, peered in, her eyes perpetually wide and skittish. Though easily cowed, Elara detected a spark of kindness beneath the timidity. Madame Beaumont, she whispered, her voice trembling, Mr. Beaumont requests your presence in the library. Elara's stomach plummeted. Thank you, Mary. I shall attend presently. Beaumont's summons invariably sparked disquiet. Haste was essential. Mary, she beckoned, lowering her voice. I require a kindness. Her gaze darted to ensure the door remained closed. This requires delivery to the village post. Discretion is paramount. Can you manage that? Mary's pupils dilated further, her gaze flicking around the room as if anticipating eavesdroppers. But, Mr. Beaumont need not be apprised, Elara countered, her tone steady despite her own fluttering pulse. It is a private matter, correspondence with a distant family member. My trust rests with you, Mary, and it shall be rewarded. From a small, painted box, she retrieved a sovereign, pressing it into the maid's trembling palm. The girl's expression flickered, greed briefly eclipsing trepidation. I can endeavor, madam, she breathed. But no promises. That is sufficient, Elara responded, handing over the missive. Exercise caution, Mary, and my gratitude. As Mary hurried away, clutching her prize, Elara experienced a strange brew of liberation and anxiety. The dice were cast, a fragile hope launched into the vast expanse of the unknown. Now, only waiting remained. The audience in the library was swift and unpleasant. Beaumont wished to discuss the estate, his tone short and patronizing. He regarded her as a mere bauble, a silent fixture in his opulent world. Elara endured it with a forced smile, her thoughts elsewhere, picturing her letter traversing oceans, continents, reaching a man she had never beheld. Days bled into weeks, each dawn heralding a fresh wave of agitation. Elara found herself drawn to the windows, an eagle eye fixed on the drive, her pulse quickening at every approaching vehicle. She attempted distraction with needlepoint and literature, but her thoughts perpetually circled back to the letter, to Caleb Miller, to the potential of a different life altogether. Sleep offered scant sanctuary. Her dreams conjured images of boundless plains, formidable mountains, and a man with gentle eyes and weathered hands. She envisioned herself at his side, liberated from the stifling confines of Ainsworth Manor, drawing deep breaths of the bracing western air. But then the nightmares would descend. Beaumont's visage, contorted with fury, looming above. The terror of discovery, of retribution, was a constant, unwelcome shadow. What if Caleb Miller proved a fraud? What if her letter was intercepted? What if she exchanged one despair for another? One rainy afternoon, as she watched sheets of rain streak the window panes, a familiar figure materialized on the curving drive. The postman. Elara's breath hitched. Motionless, she observed as he approached, deposited a bundle of letters with the butler, and then departed. An eternity seemed to pass. At last, the butler appeared, bearing a silver salver on which rested a single envelope. "For you, Madame Beaumont," he stated, his face a mask. Elara accepted the offering, her fingers quivering. The penmanship was unfamiliar, yet the postmark was undeniable. Harmony Creek, Montana Territory. A farmer's promise. The Montana sun, a brazen glare in the boundless sky, baked the back of Caleb Harding's neck as he repaired a stretch of fence. Sweat beaded at his hairline, gluing sun-bleached strands to his brow. A chorus of buzzing bees punctuated the still air, drawn to the defiant bloom of wildflowers along the fence's base, a riot of color against the aged wood. He paused, swiping his forehead with a work-worn hand, and followed the spiraling flight of a hawk overhead, a silent guardian of the plains. Caleb was a man of quiet resolve, his existence measured by the cyclical dance of seasons, the earth's yielding, the fostering of life. He found peace in the concrete, the honest toil that rooted him to the land. His farm, a humble haven cradled by the Sweetwater River's gentle curves, encompassed his world. He knew every contour of the terrain, every murmur of wind whispering through the cottonwood trees. Straightening, a familiar ache in his joints, he appraised his handiwork. The fence, weathered and patched, would serve. It had to. Calving season was imminent, and a break in the perimeter invited disaster. He returned to his task, his movements economical and sure. He derived a quiet satisfaction from caring for his own, nurturing the life that depended on him. Later, as twilight painted the horizon in strokes of coral and lavender, Caleb settled on the porch of his modest farmhouse. The air cooled, carrying the scent of pine needles and moist soil. He held a letter, fragile paper bearing an unfamiliar sigil. It had arrived earlier, nestled amongst the usual farm circulars. He recognized the elegant penmanship at once, the same hand that had authored the advertisement he'd answered months prior, the spark that had ignited a flicker of hope in his solitary life. He unfolded the letter with care, his rough fingers surprisingly gentle. For a moment, the words blurred, a swirl of expectation and trepidation. He reread it slowly, methodically, absorbing each phrase. "Mr. Harding," it began, "circumstances here are less than ideal. I find myself in need of respite and trusted companionship. Should your offer remain, I would welcome further correspondence." The letter continued, outlining her situation with a veiled delicacy that revealed much. A surge of protectiveness, almost indignation, stirred within Caleb. He didn't know this woman, Elara Ainsworth, but he recognized duress, however tastefully masked. He dedicated the next hour to composing his reply, rejecting several attempts before achieving satisfaction. He wrote of the farm, of the unadorned life he proposed, of the tranquility he discovered in the earth. He wrote of his yearning for a wife, a partner with whom to share his days, someone to cultivate a future. He wrote of his faith in integrity and compassion, in treating others with respect and kindness. He made no mention of her wealth, her station, or her predicaments. He addressed only the person he hoped she was. "I'm a plain man, Elara," he concluded. "But I pledge to you, should you choose to come here, you will find a home and safe harbor. I may not offer you grandeur, but I offer a life unshackled by fear, a life where your voice will be heard. I await your response with hope and a humble heart." Days later, within the gilded confines of Beaumont Manor, Mary, her hands faintly shaking, navigated the intricate corridors. The letter from Caleb, concealed within her apron, felt like a brand against her skin. She was keenly aware of the risks, the penalties should she be discovered. Yet, she could not stand idly by while Elara's spirit was systematically crushed. She located Elara in the music room, gazing absently at the formal gardens, her features wan and subdued. Mary cleared her throat softly. Elara turned, her eyes widening in surprise at the maid's anxious presence. "A letter, madam," Mary breathed, her voice a mere thread. "It arrived this morning." Elara reached out, her fingers briefly touching Mary's as she accepted the missive. The contact was brief, yet it conveyed a profound, unspoken gratitude. Mary executed a swift curtsy and retreated, leaving Elara alone with her fragile anticipation. Elara hurried back to her room, her heart hammering against her ribs. She recognized the handwriting immediately. "Caleb." She sank onto a chaise, her fingers tracing the foreign postmark. With trembling hands, she tore open the envelope and unfolded the letter. As his words filled her vision, a solitary tear slid down her cheek, not one of sorrow, but of something else entirely. Hope, relief, perhaps, just perhaps, a glimpse of a destiny she scarcely dared to dream. A farmer's promise, carried across the vast expanse, had found its mark. Escape in the night. The moon, a sliver of bone in the inky sky, offered Elara scant illumination. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Tonight, she would be free, or she would be caught. There was no middle ground. She moved with practiced stealth in her room, a space that felt less like a sanctuary and more like an exquisitely decorated prison cell. A small carpet bag, older than her time at Beaumont Manor, lay open on the bed. Into it, she placed only the essentials: a warm shawl, a small loaf of bread filched from the kitchens, a flask of water Mary had filled for her, and a meager collection of coins, savings secreted away from the rare occasions Beaumont gifted her money. A silver locket containing a miniature portrait of her parents, went in last. It was the only tangible link to a life before Beaumont, a life of simple. She extinguished the lamp, plunging the room into near darkness. The only light seeped in from the hallway, a ghostly rectangle on the ornate rug. Taking a deep breath, Elara eased open the door, listening intently. Silence. Good. She slipped into the corridor, hugging the shadows. The house was quiet. Most of the staff retired to their quarters. Beaumont, she hoped, was lost in his usual haze of brandy and self-importance. Mary had assured her that tonight the guards would be lax. The risk was higher, more likely to encounter someone, but the reward was greater: direct access to the gardens and the woods beyond. She reached the door to the scullery. A single candle flickered within, illuminating a young kitchen made scrubbing pots. Elara froze. Retreat was not an option. Summoning every ounce of courage, she pushed the door open. The maid, startled, dropped her scrubbing brush with a clatter. "Miss Ainsworth," she gasped, her eyes wide with alarm. Elara held up a hand, silencing her. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Don't scream. I'm leaving." The maid's expression shifted from fear to understanding. She knew what Elara endured. Many in the household did. "Going where, miss?" "Away," Elara said, her voice firm despite her inner turmoil. "Just please don't tell anyone you saw me." The maid nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and admiration. "Go quickly, miss, and Godspeed." Elara offered a small, grateful smile and slipped past her, into the cool night air. The gardens were shrouded in darkness, the manicured lawns and flower beds transformed into an intimidating labyrinth. She stayed close to the hedges, using them as cover as she made her way towards the woods. The forest loomed, a dark and forbidding wall. This was it. No turning back now. She took a deep breath and stepped into the shadows. The air under the trees was thick and damp, heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. The moon offered little help here. The canopy overhead blocked most of the light. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, sent a jolt of fear through her. She pressed on, her pace quickening as she moved deeper into the woods. The estate was behind her now, but the threat of pursuit remained. Beaumont would not take kindly to being defied. She imagined his rage, his relentless pursuit. An owl hooted in the distance, the sound echoing eerily through the trees. Elara shivered, pulling her shawl tighter around her. She was alone, utterly alone, in a vast and unforgiving wilderness. Yet, a sliver of hope flickered within her. A hope fueled by Caleb's words, by the promise of a different life, a life of her own choosing. She focused on that hope, letting it guide her through the darkness. Hours blurred into a relentless march. Fatigue gnawed at her, her legs aching, her lungs burning. She stumbled, falling to her knees on the mossy ground. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision. She wanted to give up, to succumb to the darkness and let it swallow her whole. But then, she remembered the locket, the faces of her parents, their unwavering belief in her. She remembered Caleb's letter, the simple honesty of his words. And she knew she couldn't give up. Not yet. With a groan, she pushed herself to her feet, her body screaming in protest. She took another step, then another, her determination renewed. The morning light, usually a welcome guest in Beaumont Manor, felt like an intrusion. It sliced through the heavy velvet curtains, revealing the emptiness of the bed. Beaumont stood rigid, the silk sheets twisted in his clenched fist. The scent of lavender, Elara's preferred fragrance, was a mocking reminder of her absence. He had dismissed it as a fleeting irritation when she hadn't appeared for breakfast, assuming another bout of her delicate constitution. Now, the silence of the room roared in his ears. He yanked open the drawers of her vanity, scattering perfumes and powders across the polished surface. Her jewelry box, usually overflowing with glittering treasures, was disturbingly light. A wave of icy fury washed over him, constricting his chest. "Damn her!" he roared, the sound reverberating through the room. He seized a crystal vase and hurled it against the fireplace, the shattering glass a paltry release for his rage. The door creaked open, and Mrs. Higgins, her face etched with worry, stammered, "My lord, I heard the—" "Get out!" Beaumont bellowed, his face contorted with fury. The housekeeper scurried back, her retreating footsteps echoing his own sense of betrayal. He strode to his study, the polished floor reflecting his distorted image. He needed Silas. Now, Silas Blackwood arrived within minutes, his dark eyes gleaming with anticipation. He thrived on Beaumont's anger, seeing it as an opportunity for advancement. He stood ramrod straight, awaiting instructions, his presence radiating a chilling efficiency. "She's gone." Beaumont spat, pacing like a caged animal. "Elara has run, fled like a common thief." Silas's expression remained impassive. "Run, my lord? Impossible. Where could she go? That's what I pay you to find out, isn't it? Find her, Silas. Find her and bring her back. I don't care how you do it or what it costs, but she will return to Beaumont Manor. Understand?" His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "And make sure she understands the consequences of her actions." A flicker of something akin to pleasure crossed Silas's face. "Perfectly, my lord. Consider it done." He bowed crisply and withdrew, already formulating his plan. The hunt began swiftly and brutally. Silas, a man who preferred the shadows, moved with a chilling precision. He assembled a group of men known for their ruthlessness and loyalty, men who understood the art of intimidation and coercion. They fanned out across the countryside, their methods as subtle as a battering ram. They started with the staff, interrogating them with relentless persistence. Mrs. Higgins, pale and trembling, revealed Elara's growing discontent, her whispered complaints about being trapped. The stable boys, after a few strategically placed blows, admitted to seeing Elara near the woods, though none had assisted her. Fear was a powerful weapon, and Silas wielded it with practiced ease. He questioned the villagers, offering coin for information, but threatening far worse if they withheld it. The fear of Beaumont's wrath, amplified by Silas's menacing presence, loosened tongues. A farmer recalled seeing a lone woman heading west, matching Elara's description. A shopkeeper remembered selling her provisions, a small bag of dried fruit, and a water skin. Each piece of information, no matter how small, was meticulously pieced together, forming a crude map of Elara's desperate flight. Silas himself ventured into the woods, his keen eyes scanning the undergrowth for any sign of Elara's passage. He found a discarded ribbon, its delicate silk torn and stained with mud. He held it up, a grim smile playing on his lips. She was out there, vulnerable and alone. The game was afoot. He knew Beaumont wouldn't want her harmed. Not permanently, but a little persuasion wouldn't hurt. He pictured Elara's face, pale with fear, begging for mercy. The thought sent a shiver of anticipation down his spine. He would find her. He always did. And when he did, he would make sure she regretted ever defying Lord Beaumont Harrington. A new beginning. The stagecoach rattled to a halt, spitting dust and weary passengers onto the main street of Harmony Creek. Elara stepped down, her legs shaky, clutching her small carpet bag. The western sun beat down, a stark contrast to the perpetually shadowed existence she'd known. The air smelled of pine and something earthy, something alive. She inhaled deeply, a tremor running through her. This was it, a new beginning. The town was small, a scattering of wooden buildings huddled together against the vast Montana landscape. A general store, a saloon with swinging doors, a church steeple piercing the azure sky. The scene was both foreign and strangely comforting. There was a quiet simplicity here that resonated deep within her. Caleb hadn't been at the stagecoach stop. Disappointment pricked at her, sharp and unwelcome. Had he changed his mind? Had her letter gone astray? Fear, a familiar companion, began to tighten its grip. She straightened her shoulders, smoothing down the wrinkles in her borrowed traveling dress. No, she wouldn't succumb to fear. She had come too far. She approached a woman sweeping the porch of a building that looked like a boarding house. "Excuse me," Elara said, her voice raspy from the journey. "I'm looking for Caleb Harding's farm." The woman, stout and with a face etched with the wisdom of years, stopped sweeping and peered at Elara with shrewd, assessing eyes. "Caleb, you say? Out past Miller's Creek, about 3 miles. You expecting him?" Elara nodded, her throat suddenly tight. "Yes, I wrote to him." The woman's expression softened. "Well, he's a good man, Caleb is. Works hard. Honest as the day is long. You can't miss his place. The barn needs paint and something awful." She chuckled, a warm, rumbling sound. "I'm Martha Bellwether, by the way. I run this here boarding house." "Elara Ainsworth," Elara replied, offering a small, hesitant smile. "Ainsworth, eh? Well, Elara, you look like you could use a cup of tea and sit down. Come on inside. We'll figure out how to get you out to Caleb's." The boarding house was cool and dim, smelling of beeswax and lavender. Martha bustled around, brewing tea and offering a plate of biscuits. As Elara sipped the tea, feeling the warmth spread through her, Martha launched into a stream of local gossip. "Caleb's been fixin' his fence all week. That's probably why he wasn't here to meet you. Got some stray cattle wandering onto his land. He's been expecting a letter, though. Been looking a bit peaked lately, if you ask me. Hopeful, but worried, too." Elara's heart fluttered. He was expecting her. He hadn't changed his mind. Relief washed over her, so potent it almost brought her to her knees. "I'll send my boy, Billy, to take you out there in the wagon," Martha said, interrupting Elara's thoughts. "He'll be back from school in an hour or so. You just rest yourself until then." The hour stretched into an eternity. Elara paced the small room Martha had offered her anxiety warring with hope. What would Caleb think of her? Would he see past the polished facade she had presented in her letters and accept the flawed, frightened woman she truly was? Finally, a young boy with tousled hair and a mischievous grin appeared at the door. "Ma says I gotta take you to Mr. Harding's place." The wagon ride was bumpy and slow, but Elara barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, searching for any sign of Caleb's farm. "That's him. Good luck, ma'am." Elara climbed down, her legs trembling. She took a deep breath and started walking towards the figure by the fence. Caleb heard the approaching footsteps and turned, his eyes widening in surprise. He was taller than she had imagined, with kind eyes and a weathered face that spoke of hard work and honest living. He dropped the hammer he was holding and stood staring at her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and joy. "Elara," he asked, his voice rough with emotion. She nodded, unable to speak. He closed the distance between them in a few strides, his calloused hands gently cupping her face. His touch was warm, reassuring. "You came," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I came," she replied, finally finding her voice. A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his features. "Welcome home, Elara." Shadows of the past. Elara stood by the window of the spare room, the thin curtains doing little to diffuse the harsh Montana sunlight. Dust motes danced in the golden beams, a stark contrast to the turmoil churning within her. Caleb had gone out to mend a fence that had been damaged by a recent storm, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the gnawing anxiety that had become a constant companion. He'd promised to send a letter to her solicitor, outlining the legal necessities for severing ties with Beaumont. But what if that wasn't enough? What if Beaumont simply refused to let her go? Down the lane, Silas Blackwood reined in his horse, the dust swirling around his polished boots. Two men, their faces grim and hardened, flanked him. Harmony Creek, usually a picture of tranquil rural life, suddenly felt small and vulnerable under their assessing gazes. Well, Silas drawled, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "This must be the place. Quaint, isn't it? A far cry from the refinements our little bird is used to." Martha Bellwether, her ample form blocking the doorway of her boarding house, planted her hands on her hips. "And what business brings you gentlemen to Harmony Creek?" she asked, her voice sharp. Silas dismounted, his eyes glinting with an unsettling amusement. "We're looking for someone. A recent arrival. A woman with a certain delicate beauty. Answers to the name of Elara." A ripple of unease spread through the small group of townsfolk who had gathered to observe the newcomers. Martha, however, remained impassive. "Never heard of her. This is a small town. We know everyone." Silas's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I find that hard to believe. Perhaps a little persuasion is in order." He gestured to his men, who began to spread out, questioning the townsfolk with a thinly veiled threat in their voices. One of the men approached a young boy clutching a fishing rod. "You seen a new woman around here? Real fancy-like." The boy, wide-eyed and intimidated, shook his head, backing away. Caleb, hearing the commotion, dropped his hammer and strode purposefully towards the road. He recognized the type. Men who thrived on intimidation, who saw the world as something to be taken, not earned. He wouldn't let them terrorize his town, and he certainly wouldn't let them get to Elara. He stepped in front of Silas, his presence a solid wall against the encroachment. "You bothering my neighbors?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Silas smirked, taking in Caleb's worn clothes and calloused hands. "Just asking a few questions, farmer. We're looking for a runaway wife. Belongs to a very important man." Caleb met his gaze unflinchingly. "Don't know anything about that. You're welcome to ask your questions, but do it respectfully. This is a peaceful town." "Respectfully?" Silas chuckled. "Respect is earned, farmer, not given." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Tell me, does this runaway wife happen to be hiding in your house?" Caleb's jaw tightened. He wouldn't betray Elara, but he couldn't risk a confrontation that would expose her. "Like I said, I don't know what you're talking about." "Now, I suggest you move on. You're not welcome here." Silas straightened up, his eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that, farmer. We'll see." He gestured to his men, and they remounted their horses. "We'll be back," he said, his voice a promise and a threat. "And next time, we won't be so polite." As they rode off, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake, Caleb turned to the gathered townsfolk. "Everyone all right?" he asked. Martha stepped forward, her face etched with concern. "They're looking for Elara, aren't they?" Caleb nodded grimly. "Looks that way. We need to protect her." "She can stay with me," Martha offered immediately. "My boarding house has plenty of rooms, and it's less obvious than your farm." Caleb hesitated. He didn't want to be separated from Elara, but he knew Martha was right. It was the safest option. Elara, who had been watching from the window, her heart pounding in her chest, emerged from the house. She looked at Caleb, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "I can't keep running," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I won't put you in danger either." Caleb took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "You're not putting me in danger. You're home, Elara, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect you." He looked at Martha, his gratitude evident in his eyes. "Thank you, Martha. We'll take you up on your offer." Within the hour, Elara, with a small bag containing her few belongings, was ensconced in a room at Martha's boarding house. It was a simple room, but it felt safer than Caleb's farm, less exposed. Martha bustled around, making sure Elara had everything she needed, her chatter a comforting distraction from the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. As darkness fell, casting long shadows across Harmony Creek, Elara sat by the window, watching the flickering lamplight in the houses below. She was safe for now, but the shadows of her past were closing in, threatening to extinguish the fragile hope she had found in this small Montana town. And she knew, with a chilling certainty, that Silas Blackwood wouldn't give up easily. Standing together, a whisper of lavender and chamomile did little to soothe Elara's frayed nerves. Perched on the floral chaise in Martha's parlor, she followed the lazy dance of dust motes in the sunlit air, each particle a nagging reminder of the uncertainty that clung to her. Caleb had departed at dawn, his jaw a rigid line, bound for town. He'd offered few words, only the terse announcement of necessary business and a promise to return before twilight. Their strained silence hummed with unspoken anxieties and a fierce, abiding affection. Martha entered, bearing a steaming teapot. "He's a rock, that Caleb," she declared, her voice a comforting balm. "Don't you worry your head. Harmony Creek takes care of its own." Elara managed a wan smile. But community solidarity might not suffice against the likes of Beaumont Ainsworth. Meanwhile, in O'Malley's General Store's back room, a different brew simmered, a potent blend of indignation and protective fury aimed at any outsiders who dared threaten Harmony Creek's tranquility. Caleb was seated at a scarred table, encircled by familiar faces. O'Malley, his apron dusted white, Jedediah, the blacksmith, a man sculpted from iron, and Mary Beth, the schoolteacher, her normally gentle gaze now flinty with resolve. "Beaumont Ainsworth," Caleb stated, his voice raspy. "He's the one who sent Blackwood. And Blackwood won't be back alone," Jedediah rumbled, flexing his ham-sized fists. "We all saw the look in his eyes. He'll bring a pack." O'Malley offered a curt nod. "We can't let him snatch her, Caleb. Not after everything she's endured. Not after she's finally found a haven here." Mary Beth, surprisingly, took the lead. "We need strategy, not just stubbornness." She slid a rough map of Harmony Creek across the table. "We must pinpoint ingress and egress points, establish sentry posts, and create a warning system." For hours, the discussion raged, fueled by strong coffee and steely determination. They dissected tactics, delegated duties, and cemented a pledge to shield Elara, and by extension, Harmony Creek, from any incursion. Back at the farm, Elara awaited Caleb on the porch. The sunset blazed across the horizon in shades of apricot and crimson, yet her expression remained shadowed with apprehension. "They know, don't they?" she whispered, her voice fragile. "The whole town knows." Caleb clasped her hand, his rough digits enveloping hers. They do, and they're ready to stand shoulder to shoulder with us. He spent the subsequent hour fortifying the barn doors, replacing decaying fence planks, and reinforcing the farmhouse windows. Elara labored alongside him, her initial trepidation yielding to focused energy. Each hammer blow, each tightened screw, was a defiant assertion of her resolve to remain. As dusk settled, Caleb ushered Elara to the barn. He unlocked a cabinet to reveal a rifle, its polished surface reflecting the meager light. "I know you're unfamiliar with these," he said softly, "but you need to know how to defend yourself." For the next hour, he patiently instructed her on loading, aiming, and firing the weapon. Elara proved a keen learner, her fear slowly eclipsed by a burgeoning sense of agency. The acrid tang of gun oil permeated the air, a stark contrast to the earlier floral notes. "Remember," Caleb said, his gaze unwavering, "this is a last resort. But if it comes to it, you must be ready." Elara nodded, her grip solid on the rifle. Its weight was considerable, but the burden of her past was far greater. She would not succumb. She would fight for her future, for her sanctuary, and for the man she cherished. She would stand with Harmony Creek. The final stand. The dust cloud billowed on the horizon, a slow-motion thunderhead promising a storm of a very different kind. Elara watched from the window of Martha Bellwether's bakery, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles shone white. The smell of yeast and cinnamon, usually so comforting, now felt cloying, suffocating. It was here. He was here. A rider broke from the cloud, galloping ahead. Silas Blackwood. He hadn't changed. The same hawkish face, the same cruel glint in his eyes. He surveyed the town, his gaze lingering for a moment on the bakery before moving on, a predator sizing up its prey. Elara closed her eyes, a silent prayer escaping her lips. She wasn't praying for herself. She was praying for Caleb, praying for Harmony Creek, praying that the trap they'd so carefully laid would be enough. Caleb was supposed to be fixing the north fence, a task he'd mentioned casually at breakfast, his eyes twinkling with a secret she hadn't fully understood then. Now, watching Blackwood's advance, she understood. The fence was a lie, a distraction. Caleb was waiting. The main force arrived, a motley collection of men, some in fine riding coats, others looking rough and tumble, all bearing the same stamp of arrogance that defined Beaumont Harrington. He rode at the head, a sneer plastered on his face, his eyes scanning the buildings with disdain. He was dressed as if for a fox hunt, a scarlet coat a garish splash against the muted browns of the Montana landscape. He raised a hand, and the procession halted. Well, his voice, carrying surprisingly well in the still air, dripped with condescension. "So this is it? Harmony Creek. Hardly a fitting refuge for my property." Martha squeezed Elara's hand. "He hasn't won yet, child." The first sign of resistance came not from the town itself, but from the creek. A sharp crack, followed by a strangled yell. One of Beaumont's men, attempting to water his horse, had stepped into a cleverly concealed snare. A second later, another scream echoed from the opposite bank. More traps. Beaumont's face flushed crimson. "What is the meaning of this?" he roared. Blackwood spurred his horse forward. "Simple defenses, my lord. Easily overcome." He underestimated Harmony Creek. As Blackwood advanced, a volley of shots rang out from the surrounding buildings. Not haphazard shots, but precise, deliberate. The Harmony Creek women, usually seen tending gardens and children, were now defending their homes with a quiet ferocity. Beaumont's men, caught off guard, scrambled for cover. Horses reared and whinnied in panic. The air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder. From the window, Elara saw Caleb emerge from the general store, a rifle held steady in his hands. His eyes met hers, a brief, reassuring nod before he turned his attention back to the fight. He moved with a quiet confidence, a stark contrast to Beaumont's blustering rage. The townsfolk knew their land, every gully, every rock, every hidden path. They used it to their advantage, picking off Beaumont's men one by one. Beaumont, his face contorted with fury, urged his men forward, but they were met with a wall of determined resistance. "Enough!" Beaumont bellowed, dismounting and striding towards the bakery. Blackwood followed close behind. Elara knew this was it, the moment of truth. She couldn't hide any longer. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders and walked out of the bakery, meeting Beaumont's gaze head-on. "Beaumont," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "This ends now." He stopped, his eyes widening in disbelief. "Elara? What is the meaning of this charade? Come home. You're embarrassing yourself." "This is my home," she said, gesturing around at the besieged town. "And I am not your property. I am not yours to command." Beaumont's face darkened. "You ungrateful." He lunged for her, but Caleb was there in an instant, stepping between them, his rifle raised. "Stay away from her, Beaumont," Caleb said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is Harmony Creek, and we don't take kindly to bullies." The fight was far from over, but in that moment, standing between the man who claimed her and the man who loved her, Elara knew she had already won. She had found her strength, her voice, her freedom, and she would defend it with everything she had. Freedom found. Beaumont Harrington stood, a shrunken figure of his former self, disbelief stark on his features. The fiery arrogance that had defined him seemed to have fizzled out, extinguished by Elara's defiance and Caleb's protective presence. He'd anticipated fear, maybe a hint of the submissive woman he remembered. Instead, he faced a woman reborn, tempered by adversity and emboldened by love. He shot a glance at Silas, whose silence was a study in impassivity, more unsettling than any outburst. Even Silas appeared to sense the shift in power, the palpable solidarity of the townsfolk, an unspoken warning hanging heavy in the air. "This isn't finished, Elara," Beaumont finally croaked, his voice robbed of its earlier force. "You can't stay hidden forever." Elara's gaze didn't waver. "I'm not hiding, Beaumont. I'm home." He hesitated, his gaze flitting to Caleb before returning to Elara, seemingly realizing further confrontation would be fruitless for now. With a clipped nod toward Silas, he wheeled around and trudged back to their waiting carriage, his shoulders bowed in defeat. Silas followed, his dark eyes lingering on Elara for a fleeting moment before he, too, vanished. A wave of relief washed over the assembled townsfolk. The tension that had gripped Harmony Creek for what felt like an age began to dissipate, replaced by cautious optimism. Martha Bellwether stepped forward, her arm finding its way around Elara's shoulders in a comforting embrace. "You showed him, sweetheart. You show them all." Elara leaned into Martha's embrace, her legs suddenly unsteady. The adrenaline that had surged through her veins began to recede, leaving her trembling slightly. Caleb's strong arm came around her waist, drawing her close. "You were incredible," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Elara looked up at him, her heart brimming with gratitude and love. "We were incredible," she corrected, her gaze encompassing the faces of her newfound friends and neighbors. The days that followed were a period of quiet healing. The menace had retreated, yet the memory persisted, a stark reminder of the darkness Elara had escaped. Caleb, ever sensitive to her moods, offered unwavering support, his presence a constant reassurance. He dedicated hours to reinforcing the fences around their property, an outward display of his commitment to safeguard her. One afternoon, Elara discovered Caleb hammering away at a fenced section bordering the south pasture. The rhythmic clang of the hammer resonated through the tranquil valley, a comforting soundscape. She approached him, a basket laden with freshly baked bread in her hands. "Here," she offered, presenting the basket. "Something to replenish your strength." Caleb ceased hammering and wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of dirt. He grinned, his eyes creasing at the corners. "Precisely what I needed." He took a piece of bread, inhaling its warm, malty scent. "You're extraordinary, Elara." She smiled, affection blooming in her chest. "So are you, Caleb." She paused, her gaze drawn to the vista. The fields pulsed with color, the wheat rippling in the gentle breeze, wildflowers erupting in a vibrant tapestry. It's breathtaking, Caleb. Our home. He covered her hand with his touch a warm anchor. It is, and it's ours. Together. Elara inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with the crisp, clean air. She experienced a tranquility she hadn't imagined possible, a sense of belonging that had eluded her for so long. Later that week, a missive arrived for Caleb. He perused it silently, his brow etched with concentration. Upon finishing, he raised his eyes to Elara, his expression ambiguous. "It's from the sheriff in Bozeman," he stated, his voice low. "They apprehended Beaumont and Silas Blackwood. They were attempting to flee the state." Relief surged through Elara. It was at last over. The nightmare was finally behind her. "What will become of them?" she inquired. "Beaumont will likely face charges for harassment and intimidation," Caleb responded. Silas possesses a more extensive record. They suspect he was involved in some rather grave offenses back east. He'll be detained for questioning. Elara nodded, her thoughts already focused on the future. She would not linger on the past. She refused to let it define her. She had a new life to cultivate, a life overflowing with love, hope, and boundless opportunities. The following spring, Elara and Caleb established a small apple orchard on the hillside overlooking their farmhouse. As they toiled side by side, their hands brushing occasionally, Elara couldn't suppress a smile. The air was fragrant with the delicate perfume of blossoms, and the sun bathed her face in warmth. She gazed at Caleb, his face flushed with exertion, his eyes sparkling with joy. "Do you believe they'll flourish?" she asked, gesturing towards the newly planted saplings. Caleb grinned. "With devotion and nurturing, I'm certain they will." He paused, his gaze locking with hers. "Just like us." Elara reached out and clasped his hand, her fingers interlacing with his. "Just like us," she echoed, her voice imbued with emotion. As the sun began its descent, casting elongated shadows across the valley, Elara and Caleb stood hand in hand, surveying their burgeoning orchard, their future unfolding before them, radiant and full of promise. They had discovered liberation in Harmony Creek, not merely from the shadows of the past, but within the simple pleasures of the present moment and the limitless anticipation of a shared tomorrow. Their love stood as the seed set to blossom into a timeless and beautiful legacy, rooted deep in the rich soil of their newly found home.